We'll move to questions without notice. I'll give the call. Order. The member for Herbert will cease interjecting. Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's political game playing is costing Australian families and businesses. Electricity prices, groceries, mortgages and rents are all surging. Despite this, the Prime Minister's priority is to pursue a divisive Canberra-based voice proposal while refusing to directly condemn comments that Australians are either racist or stupid. When will the Prime Minister admit his incompetence and mishandling of issues that are hurting Australians and dividing our country?
Order. The member for McNamara is warned. There will be no interjecting before any minister answers a question. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I await their points of order about sledging from this dispatch box after that question, Mr Speaker. I await it and draw everyone's attention to the nature of that question. That says a lot about the character of this opposition.
Order.
It is negative, it's angry, it's hostile, it seeks to divide,
Order.
It never seeks to bring people together. And this comes at a time when today—
Members on my left will cease
Today
interjecting.
we have figures showing that employment has increased by 64,900. Labor participation is up to 67%, a record. More than two-thirds of Australians participating in the labour market, with the unemployment rate in August remaining at 3.7%. Mr Speaker, that is an envy of the world, and we've now created more than 550,000 jobs have been created on our watch since we came to office. But what we have opposite, just like we had with the Housing Australia Future Fund legislation earlier, is just an obsession with voting no to everything, an obsession with just being negative, including an obsession with being negative about the referendum that Australians will get to vote on October 14. Well, Mr Speaker, yesterday, as part of my job as Prime Minister, I chaired the National Science and Technology Council. And yesterday we had a terrific meeting along with the Science Minister. It brings together the chief scientists and all of the best scientific brains in this country. And yesterday we heard from Michaela Jade, a Darug woman who has done research about science and the impact of First Nations science. She spoke about how when Europeans came to southwest Sydney, they named Cabramatta after the Indigenous Australians eating the cabra grub. The reason why they were eating the cabra grub, they found out many years later, was because it provided an antidote to smallpox. And now in the United States, they have found that it's an antidote to superbugs. It's an example of whereby if we're just prepared to listen, prepared to embrace, prepared to be positive, this can be a win for Indigenous Australians, but also a win for our nation.
Order. The member for O'Connor. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Wills.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. What does the passage of the Housing Australia Future Fund mean for Australians needing a safe and affordable place to call home?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Homelessness and Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank the member for Wills for that question. I know that the member for Wills, like the Prime Minister and I, spent some of his early childhood in public housing. He knows how important public and social housing is. So I know he fully appreciates just how momentous this is. Today is a day that will change housing in Australia. The Housing Australia Future Fund has now passed the Parliament. Our government has now delivered on our promise to the Australian people. A $10 billion fund to create a secure, ongoing pipeline of funding for social and
Order.
affordable
The member for
housing
Deakin.
into the future. The single biggest investment in affordable and social housing in more than a decade, Mr Speaker. It means more homes in every corner of this country, our cities, our regions, our towns. More homes for women and children impacted by family and domestic violence. More homes for older women at risk of homelessness. More homes for our veterans who need a safe space to spend the night. And more homes for Australians needing an affordable place to call home. Mr Speaker, this is our government working for Australians, and we're going to keep working with our state and territory colleagues, working with the construction sector, working with the community housing providers and working with institutional investors to deliver on these homes. We know the largest community housing provider in New South Wales, St George Community Housing, has, for example, over 470 social and affordable homes lined up, ready to go today. And they are not alone. Across the country, providers and states already have in place plans so that when this fund was actually passed the parliament, they can get on with building. We're ready to build more homes, Mr Speaker. And thanks to the Housing Australia Future Fund, there will be funding for new social and affordable homes in perpetuity. I'm proud that we've delivered on one part of our ambitious housing agenda. We also, of course, have our new national target to build 1.2 million homes across the country, with our $3 billion new homes bonus, our $500 million housing support program, our $2 billion social housing accelerator, our national housing accord, our boost to Commonwealth rent assistance, the additional $2 billion in financing for social and affordable housing, new incentives to boost the supply of rental housing, the $1.7 billion extension to the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement, leadership on renters' rights, changes to the Home Guarantee Scheme,
Order.
the introduction of the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee. Mr Speaker, we've got a lot of work to do. We've done a lot, and we're going to keep working hard every day so that more Australians have a safe, affordable place to call home.
Before I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is a delegation of 250 young leaders from across Australia taking part in the 22nd National Leadership Forum. And also, I'm advised by Dr Scomps, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are traditional owners from the Mulalinja and Mataranka regions of the Northern Territory, and I see former Senator Nova Peris in the gallery today. A warm welcome to you all. Give the call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In July this year, Voice architect and member of the government's referendum working group, Professor Marsha Langton, said, quote, 22% of the Australian population are deeply racist, end quote. Does the Prime Minister agree with this statement?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I agree that Australians are generous people, is what I think. I think Australians are fundamentally decent, and I call for everyone, regardless of what way they vote in a democratic referendum. I respect Australians, each and every one of them, and I call upon everyone in this debate to be respectful, to carry themselves like my friend Michael Long, who joins us in the gallery. I joined Michael Long today. Michael has walked from Melbourne to Parliament House, just as he did in 2004. He did so then because so many of his friends and family and people he knew were dying. He was sick of attending funerals. Now, almost 20 years later, the gap has not closed. Michael Long has walked a long way. He's asking Australians to walk just a short way, to walk a short way. To quote the Uluru Statement, to walk with us in a movement of the Australian people for a better future. That's what we're being asked to do, to show the generosity and character of the Australian people. Whilst Indigenous people for 65,000 years, and particularly since 1788, have suffered a lot. We have an 8-year life expectancy gap. We have a greater chance of an Indigenous young male going to jail than going to university. We cannot do things the same way and expect different outcomes. Michael Long has come to Parliament today. Now it's up to us to carry his message of love and hope and reconciliation away from the Parliament and back to the people in our electorates. In the next 4 weeks, Australians can take the next step to a better future by writing yes. That is all we're being asked to do, to write yes, to walk those few steps. To walk those few steps is what we're being asked to do. And that step will give our nation the opportunity to take a giant stride to recognition, reconciliation and closing the gap. This is about recognition of First Nations people in our Constitution. It's an advisory group whose only power will be the power of its ideas. The only power it will have is the power of its ideas. Has no right of veto, has no capacity to direct the government or to direct the parliament. The primacy of parliament is there.
Members on my left.
And I think it's a pity that these interjections occur, consistent with, as Michael said this morning in his letter, former Prime Minister Howard has asked Australians to maintain the rage. This is about love and reconciliation and bringing people together. That's what Michael Long is about.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Prime Minister's time. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why is progress on housing policy such an important part of the government's broader economic plan? And how is it delivering more affordable homes after a wasted decade of inaction?
The call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Higgins for her advocacy for renters in her community in particular, and also for the question. Today we passed the biggest single investment in social and affordable housing in more than a decade, Mr Speaker. And I pay tribute to this Prime Minister and this Housing Minister. And I thank the crossbenchers for their support as well. Now, not everybody in this parliament voted for the Housing Australia Future Fund, Mr Speaker, and the Hansard will record forever that the Liberals and the Nationals voted for fewer homes and more homelessness and higher rents, Mr Speaker. Now, the parliament did something really important today, and we have every right to be really proud of it, because the progress that we made today means more people will have roofs over their heads. The $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund—
Treasurer will pause. Just resume your seat for a moment. I've warned the member for Deakin about continually interjecting. He's in a warning. Throughout this answer, you've been interjecting, giving commentary. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. If anyone else gets warned, use that as an example. You simply cannot interject once you've been warned. Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. The $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund is an important part of our housing policy, but it's not the only part of our housing policy. It comes hand in hand with another $8 billion of investment over 2 budgets in social and affordable housing. And it also comes with the biggest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance in 3 decades, which is an example of how we are taking some of the edge off the cost of living pressures in our economy without adding to inflation. It's an important part of our fight against inflation, and it is also part of our broader economic plan. And that plan and this government is working for Australia. In difficult times, we are making welcome progress. Inflation is too high, but it's moderating. We are rolling out billions of dollars in cost of living help. We got the first surplus in 15 years, and the labour market is proving to be especially resilient. We saw that today. 64,900 jobs created in 1 month, Mr Speaker. Now, I want the House to remember these numbers, Mr Speaker. Since monthly records were kept, there have been only 18 times in our history that unemployment's had a 3 in front of it. 15 of those 18 times have been under this Prime Minister and this government. 15 out of 18 times, Mr Speaker, unemployment with a 3 in front of it. The longest run of unemployment this low on record. This is a stunning outcome for the people of Australia and for our economy. And it demonstrates something really important as well, Mr Speaker. This government and this country is capable of making progress together on the cost of living, on jobs and wages, on housing and, yes, on the voice as well, Mr Speaker. And in every respect, the contrast couldn't be clearer with the wasted decade of economic mismanagement and division and disappointment which defined the decade of the Liberals and Nationals in office.
Order. There's far too much noise, particularly from the member for Riverina, Barker and Hume. Just saying, cease interjecting. It's a pre-warning to a warning. Okay, the call goes to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. My constituent, Paul Whitman, has mantle cell lymphoma, but the therapy he needs, CAR T-cell therapy, is not funded for his condition. The therapy is already accessed by Australians with other conditions, and it was recommended by the Medical Services Advisory Committee for treatment of mantle cell lymphoma 2 years ago. Consequently, we have a system that delivers inequitable access to life-saving treatments. Why is this therapy being withheld from patients like Paul?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for North Sydney for that question. And can I extend my best wishes to Mr Whitman and his family in a difficult battle against mantle cell lymphoma, a relatively rare form of blood cancer. I want to say a couple of things about this type of therapy before I come particularly to the one that the member for North Sydney has asked about. This is a relatively new therapy, a cutting-edge therapy that extraordinarily, frankly, extracts a patient's T-cells, sends them off somewhere to be modified to equip that T-cell to fight a particular cancer, and then re-injects them back into the patient. And this therapy is proving very successful in battling, at this stage at least, a number of types of blood cancer. Until now, T-cell therapy has required the T-cells to be sent either to Europe or to America and then come back to Australia to be re-injected into the patient. But I'm delighted to say that a few weeks ago I opened the first manufacturing site in the Southern Hemisphere at the very well-renowned Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre down in Parkville in Melbourne, which will mean from now on we're able to do our own modification here in Australia in sufficient numbers to cover the entire Australian market and also provide some export capability to the region. CAR T-cell therapy, it's important to say, is delivered in public hospitals by state governments, and it's co-funded on a 50-50 cost-sharing basis as part of our hospital funding agreement. So it does require state government agreement to implement the therapy. It only does that after a recommendation from the Medicare Services Advisory Council, MSAC, which you know balances the clinical and cost-effectiveness of a therapy. This question raises a few important points that are missed, frankly, in the question about Tecartus, which is the particular therapy that the member has asked about. The drug company that makes Tecartus, Gilead, made an application to MSAC for approval back in 2020 and 2021 at a particular price that they wanted for the therapy. MSAC approved the therapy as clinically effective, but recommended it be paid a much lower price, and Gilead refused to act on that recommendation. A few months ago, my department approached Gilead to ask them to resubmit their proposal at a lower price, which they did. MSAC then, out of session, approved that price and sent that recommendation to me. I've accepted the recommendation and only a few weeks ago wrote to the state governments asking them to agree for us to act jointly on that. I'm still waiting for a response. That letter only went to them a few weeks ago. They deliver the therapy, and I must really stress this, they have to agree to it. I'm hoping for urgent action on this, and I will keep the member informed as to progress about this particular therapy.
Concluded. Call to the honourable member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the Housing Australia Future Fund help build a better future and make sure there are more homes for more Australians?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Jagga Jagga for her question and for her support and engagement on this issue. We know that this is a big victory for Australians who need a home. It's a victory in the People's House that will mean more houses for more people. This is a commitment that arose from my second budget reply that we took to the election. A fund worth $10 billion that will provide at least $500 million each and every year for social and affordable housing. Social housing for people who need it to bring down those waiting lists, affordable housing for essential workers. But in addition to that, of the 30,000 homes, 4,000 will be reserved for women and children escaping domestic violence. Yeah. We know each and every night too many women and their kids have to search for somewhere to stay. They stay on someone's lounge, or they stay in a park, or they stay in the car because there simply isn't enough emergency housing around. So that will be important. In addition to that, we'll provide for $100 million of the funding will go to emergency housing to provide that support. In addition to that, we'll provide funding for remote Indigenous housing. We know that much of it is dilapidated and in a condition that is completely unacceptable. This will provide funding for it. In addition to that, it will have a Housing Supply and Affordability Council, bringing together Commonwealth, state, local government and the private sector for how we drive that supply through so that we achieve the objective of 1.2 million homes that we need. In addition to that, of course, we have got together with state and territory governments for the most significant set of housing reforms in a generation. That new national target with the incentive there of $3 billion for states and territories to reform their planning laws so that we can get more homes built in more locations in our cities and in our regions. This is absolutely critical going forward, and it's an example of the policy that we developed in opposition, taking it into government and making sure that it is delivered. And I thank all of the crossbenchers in both the House and the Senate for their support for this. As usual, the opposition just decided to say no, as they always do, to everything. But they are the blockers, we are the builders on this side of the chamber, Mr Speaker. They are the great wreckers of Australian politics, the great wreckers who exclude themselves from participation because they just say no. Just say no to everything that comes before this House. We have a positive plan that we're implementing.
Give the call to the member for Moncrieff.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, what areas of government policy do not affect Indigenous Australians?
Order. The Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity is warned. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question, which goes to the referendum that is before the Australian people, and goes to the three clauses that are there that Australians will have the opportunity to vote for on October 14. They'll vote for, firstly, recognition. They'll firstly vote for recognition.
The member for Barker
and that
the member for Hume. Order. The Prime Minister will pause. Just going to ask the member for Barker and the member for Hume to cease interjecting for the remainder of this question. Preferably the rest of question time, but I'll take one at a time. Order. When the House comes to order, the Prime Minister, the member for Moncrieff was heard in silence. She was given that courtesy. I'm just asking the same courtesy be given to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The referendum question is quite clear. It says, in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia. There's the recognition. And then it says how. There shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice.
The member for Moncrieff is seeking the call. The Prime Minister is less than 1 minute in. Before I call, you get the call. Just before I call the member for Moncrieff, the Prime Minister is less than 1 minute into the call. Under the standing orders, you're entitled to raise the point of order under relevance. I just want to say, once the relevance point is made, right now we won't be able to raise that point again, but I'll give her the call. If
Point of
you
order.
wish to give the call, you want the call?
Thank you, yes.
The member for Moncrieff has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. The Prime Minister has been asked a very tight question, very, very tight question.
Resume
Areas
your-
of government that do not affect
Resume your seat.
Indigenous...
Okay. Well, as the member, just the Prime Minister, before I give him a call, the member for Moncrieff knows that all ministers and Prime Ministers are entitled to a preamble. So I don't know what's coming for the remainder of the answer, but order, the Leader of the Opposition. The point of order of relevance has now been made. I just want to be clear with that. It's been ruled on, and the Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And then the question that's before the Australian people goes through 3 points. There shall be a body. It may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander.
Order.
And that
Order.
goes to the question that has been asked. The third bit is connected to the second bit. Funnily enough, it follows. 3 follows 2. And 3 says, the Parliament shall, subject to its constitution, have power to make laws with respect to
Order.
matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. So if there is... Oh, no. Can I ask that be withdrawn?
Order. Just going to ask the member for New England to assist the House and to withdraw so we can continue to assist. It will assist the House to do a withdrawal.
I withdraw.
I thank the member for New England. Order. Prime Minister has the call.
Twice you made him Deputy PM.
Prime Minister will,
So
Prime Minister will
I-
return to the question.
That's fair enough. The member
Order.
for Riverina was against him. That is true.
The Prime
That is
Minister
true.
will not take the interjections. He has the call.
Mr Speaker, the point of the voice is that it's an advisory group
Order.
that very clearly doesn't have the right of veto, doesn't have the power to direct Parliament or to direct the
Order.
government. So it just has the power of its ideas. And just like the Business Council of Australia can make representations over
Order.
whether Melbourne or the Roosters are going to win this Saturday, it's not
Order.
relevant.
The Prime Minister will...
It's not relevant.
Order. The
And
member
what
for
will happen-
Fairfax will cease interjecting or be warned.
And what will happen if you go and talk to the Michael Longs of this world about what their priorities are for Indigenous Australians? The idea that their priority is about parking tickets or anything else is complete nonsense. You're the ones that have raised it, mate.
Order. The Prime
Or
Minister
where
will,
nuclear-powered
will
subs
direct
will
his marks
be.
to the chair.
It's advisory only.
Order.
It
The Prime
only has
Minister's
the power
time
of
has
its ideas.
concluded. The order when the House. The member for Bowman will leave the chamber under 94A. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Social Services. How will the Housing Australia Future Fund help deliver the Albanese government's commitment to support women and children experiencing family and domestic violence to have a safe and affordable place to call home?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Macquarie for that question as well. Of course, today's passage of the Housing Australia Future Fund is an important step to ensuring that women and children experiencing family and domestic violence have a safe and affordable place to call home. Now, our government recognises that having a safe place to live is essential if we're going to end gender-based violence in one generation.
Order.
Of course, escaping domestic and family violence is a significant driver for women and children leaving their home in Australia. Around 40% of people seeking homelessness services in Australia are women and children who have experienced family and domestic violence. And we also know that too many victim survivors are forced to be between returning to a violent relationship or becoming homeless. Indeed, it's estimated that in any 1 year, as a result of unaffordable, inadequate and insecure housing, over 7,000 women are returning to violent homes because they have no place to live. Now, the passage of the Housing Australia Future Fund will unlock $100 million over the first 5 years for crisis and transitional housing options for women and children fleeing violence and for older women at risk of homelessness. Now, in addition to this investment in crisis and transitional housing, the HAF will also facilitate 4,000 new long-term homes for those impacted by family and domestic violence and for older women. This government elevated the importance of housing in our national plan to end violence against women and children, including the importance of access to short-term, medium-term and long-term housing for women and children. The HAF will complement our efforts already underway to ensure that these different housing options all along that continuum are able to be delivered, including through our Safe Places program. These investments make a real difference, and I saw this firsthand when I visited with the member for Macquarie a short-term women's crisis accommodation project in South Windsor. This is making a difference on the ground. Building more housing for women and children is part of our broader plan, which also includes a range of other initiatives that we've funded in our last 2 budgets. But I would like to remind everyone listening today who may be experiencing violence that help is available, that please, if you need help, reach out. 1-800-RESPECT is there for you 24 hours a day. This government is working hard to improve access to safe and affordable housing for women and children experiencing violence, and we will keep working for all Australians to ensure that they have a place to call home.
Give the call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. On Tuesday, the Minister was asked about gender parity on The Voice. The Minister responded by outlining principles in relation to this matter. Can the Minister now inform the House exactly how gender parity on The Voice will be achieved?
Order. 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 Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Lindsay was heard in silence, and so will the Minister for Australians, because she has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Lindsay for her question? It's very similar to a question that I received earlier in the week. And what I can say very clearly is that the principles of The Voice are agreed to, and they outline clearly the way in which The Voice will have gender parity. In fact, it's not a new idea and didn't come about in the last 12 months. It was something that was very heavily suggested in the Julian Lesser, Patrick Dodson inquiry some years ago. It is important that we have gender parity, and it is not difficult to achieve. The most important thing about this Voice is that, as the Prime Minister has said, it is an advisory body to the Parliament. And as the third part of the amendment also says, that you, everyone in this chamber, in this House, will have a role in determining the scope and the function and how The Voice will operate. This is an important point. I will just reiterate that The Voice is advisory, it will not deliver programs, and it has no veto power.
Call to the honourable the Minister for Industry and Skills will cease interjecting. Order. The member for Longman will cease interjecting. I want to hear from the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. What do today's job figures reveal about the government's approach to employment? Why is it important to ensure businesses don't avoid their obligations to their employees?
Call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Spence, and I'm pleased to let him know that for his state of South Australia, the unemployment figure reported today has never been lower in the state of South Australia. Never been lower. We've had more than 500,000 jobs created, but under this government, female employment has never been higher. Female full-time employment has never been higher.
Order.
Female full-time employment is up by nearly 200,000 jobs. And in today's labour force figures, the number of Australians in work has never been higher. The participation rate has never been higher. Youth employment has never been higher.
Order.
But the other fear campaign that I remember getting last year, we had that our legislation would be a disaster for jobs, and then we were also told to be a problem for industrial action. Now, let's remember the last quarter, number of days lost for industrial action under those opposite, the figure was 128,000. In the quarter we've just had, not 128,000 days lost to industrial action, 10,200. 10,200. So their fear campaign hasn't landed all that well. But I noticed on the front page of The Australian today there's a new thing we're meant to be afraid of that I've got to say I never saw this one coming. So the argument that's been put today is some anger from one of the business groups that the anti-evasion provisions that are in the Closing Loopholes Bill start from the date of introduction of the bill. And the argument from the business group is the government indicated business would have more than 12 months to get ready for the changes in the bill. Now, I just have to explain. That was to get ready 12 months to comply with the bill, not 12 months to find a new way of evading the bill. And this is something that's not uncommon at all in tax legislation. Those opposite might be unfamiliar with this, but their own tax legislation, bills in 2015, in 2019, in 2018, in 2017, in 2020, all use the same principle. And why? Because if you're bringing in a new provision of compliance, the intention is that business complies, and you start your anti-evasion provisions from the date of introduction. That's to make sure that we do have strong laws that stamp out wage theft. It's to make sure that we do close the labour loophole. It's to make sure that we do give rights to casuals. It's to make sure that gig workers who currently have no minimum standards get minimum standards for the first time. Those opposite and the campaign against this bill is all about trying to trade one loophole for the next loophole. We're determined to make sure that minimum standards are real in this country.
Time has concluded. Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. I refer to a discussion the Minister had with Qantas executive Vanessa Hudson regarding the Qatar application for extra flights prior to the Minister's decision being made. What was the content of that discussion?
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Regional Development and Local Government.
I haven't had any discussions with Vanessa Hudson about the Qatar decision at all.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Voice referendum is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Australians to come together, to recognise and listen to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. What message did AFL great Michael Long share with the Prime Minister this morning about the referendum, and how will it bring our country together?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question and for her passionate advocacy of the rights of Indigenous people in her electorate and beyond. Michael Long is, I believe, a great Australian. He's someone who's passionate about lifting up opportunity for young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and indeed his relatives, including a very young boy, walked with us this morning across the bridge to Parliament House. It was a historic moment, and it followed from his historic trek back in 2004. He is very passionate about making a difference, and he understands very firmly that giving Indigenous Australians a voice will make a difference, because when you listen to people who are directly affected, you have a much greater opportunity to actually make decisions with Indigenous people rather than for them, or in worst case scenario, to them, which is what has occurred. For 122 years there has been a voice. It's been a voice from Canberra to Indigenous communities. This is about getting a voice to Canberra from Indigenous communities, a voice that will have no power over this parliament or over government, but it will have the power of its ideas being put forward in a respectful way. And I thank Michael, along with Pat Farmer, who I had the honour of trying to keep up with on his run for the voice in Sydney just a few weeks ago. Pat Farmer, a distinguished former member of this place, the former Liberal member for Macarthur. But this morning I was reminded of another event where Indigenous Australians walked to this parliament, and that was Jimmy Clements back in 1927, when this parliament was opened by the Duke of York on May the 9th. And Jimmy Clements walked from Tumut. He was a Wiradjuri man. Our minister here is a Wiradjuri woman. And he walked, and along with John Noble, was the only two Indigenous people here. The police tried to move Clements on because he was barefoot and because he'd walked for days and days to get here. But the people outside rose up and said, no, he's got a right to be here. And there was people coming together in what must have been one of those first acts of reconciliation and generosity. On October 14, just as Indigenous Australians have walked those distances, we are being asked to walk just a few steps, to, with a hand outreached, as I did with Michael this morning, to just join it. That's what Australians do. That's what Australians do, to move forward together.
Give the call to the honourable member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. Recommendation 16 of the You Win Some, You Lose More report into online gambling recommended that the Australian Government prohibit all online gambling inducements and inducement advertising, and that it do so without delay. Minister, when will this recommendation be implemented?
Order. I give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Mayo for her question. She has been a long-standing advocate for reform in this area, and we acknowledge the work that she does in her community and more broadly as well. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government is committed to ensuring that online gambling takes place within a robust legislative framework with strong consumer protections. And that's why we welcome the report of the committee, ably chaired by the member for Dunkley, which was handed down recently, which included the experiences of many Australians, harm reduction advocates and industry groups who participated in this process. Now, as the member rightly points out, there are a number of recommendations that go to matters that include both advertising and inducements. There's two parts to the answer here that I give to the member for Mayo. The first is that the government is considering all the recommendations of this report in a holistic and comprehensive manner. We need to ensure that they are capable of implementation, that they become effective, and also that they have the desired outcome, above all else, of achieving the principle of harm minimisation. And we know that some of these recommendations involve the states and territories, which is the second part of this answer. Some of these matters go to issues that are within the purview of the states and territories and require a degree of cooperation. They also require a degree of cooperation across portfolios, including in conjunction, particularly, the Minister for Social Services, who has responsibility for the National Consumer Protection Framework. As the member will be well aware, the National Consumer Protection Framework steps have now concluded. We achieved that only a couple of weeks ago under this government by activating BetStop, the one-touch mechanism for self-exclusion from all forms of online gambling. So we are working through those recommendations now. We know that some of these aspects, as the member rightly points out, will require the cooperation of states and territories. But I can assure the member and all members of this House that this government believes that the status quo is unsustainable. We need to ensure that there is effective change in this area, again in accordance with those principles of harm minimisation. We are currently working on all of those recommendations and appreciate the member's involvement, and will continue to liaise with the member and all interested members of the parliament as we take this policy forward.
Give the call to the honourable member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Attorney, why is it important to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through a voice?
Great question. Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Lingiari for her question. In 2015, a Liberal Prime Minister and a Labor opposition leader asked the question, how do Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want to be recognised in the Constitution? The answer to that question did not come from politicians. It could not have come from politicians. Only Indigenous Australians could answer that question, and in 2017 they did. In 2017, over 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander delegates gathered at Uluru and issued the Uluru Statement from the Heart, calling for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. This was and is how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people...
The member for Barker has had a really good go today. He'll leave the chamber under 94A. Simply not acceptable for people to continually be interjecting non-stop. The Attorney-General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This was and is how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people want to be recognised in our Constitution. After years of failed programs and failed policies, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people told us that they were not seeking a purely symbolic form of recognition. They told us symbolic language would not do anything to improve unacceptable outcomes for Indigenous Australians. They told us that more of the same is not good enough. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people called for a practical form of constitutional recognition, one that will improve the way that we develop laws and policies relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so we get better results in areas like health and education and housing.
Order.
That's what the voice is about, listening to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people so we get better outcomes. We cannot risk more of the same. But as the Leader of the Opposition demonstrates, every time he talks about the upcoming referendum, more of the same is all that the No campaign has to offer. The No campaign is offering no solutions for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Voting yes can do only good. Voting yes at this referendum means voting yes for a better future for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and for all Australians.
Give the call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
In July 2019, speaking about the matters that a federal treaty could cover, the minister said, quote, "It could be about fiscal arrangements." Does the minister now stand by that statement?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Order. Order. The House will come to order so I can hear from the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for Hume for his question? Let us be extraordinarily clear. The Voice will be a committee of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that will give advice. And as the Prime Minister says, it is about the validity and the power of those ideas. The Voice will also include Indigenous Australians from every state and territory, the Torres Strait Islands, and representatives from the regions and remote communities. Members of the Voice will be chosen by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in their local area and serve for a fixed period.
The Minister will pause. The member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. It was a very specific question about fiscal arrangements in a treaty and a statement that was made by the minister.
Order. The Minister for Regional Development will cease interjecting. Just going to say the minister's had a minute in. I'm going to ask her to return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
To make sure she's being directly relevant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Voice referendum is the 14th of October, and I invite you to get on board.
Call to the order. Give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Treasurer. Why is it important to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through a voice, and how will it benefit both Australian society and the economy, and what approaches have been rejected?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker. I acknowledge the dedication that the member for Robertson brings to this place, and I thank him for the question. I also wanted to acknowledge, as the PM has, Michael Long and Nova Peris and everyone who's been engaged in this long walk of Michael's. You are an inspiration to all of us, Michael and Nova and everyone associated with this great cause. Now, Mr Speaker, as you know, in 30 days' time, Australians will have a generational opportunity to listen better and to get better outcomes for First Nations people. And when you strip away all of the conspiracy theories and all the mistruths and you look through the fog of misinformation and manipulation, this opportunity is really clear and it's really important to our country and to all of its people. And I know, Mr Speaker, that over the next 30 days there will be a number of Australians who will make up their mind and they might not have decided yet. And I say to them, this is our chance to do things differently and to do things better, and that's what this Voice is all about at its core. We need to turn all of the goodwill and all of the taxpayer investment into better results and more progress, because the status quo isn't working as well as it needs to. And as Minister Burney has said, we need to go beyond making policy for First Nations people and make policy with them instead. We need to bring together our people and our principles and our pragmatism and do something that we can be proud of. It will cost us nothing, but it will gain so much for the first of us, but also for all of us, Mr Speaker. And I'm asked about what approaches we've rejected. And we reject the bizarre policy of the opposition leader who wants to have 2 referendums here and not one, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition wants 2 referendums because he wants to drag this out. He sees this not as an opportunity for unity, but as an excuse for division. He wants Australians stuck in a cul-de-sac of confusion and conflict. That's what's going on here, Mr Speaker. Order. He wants to leave this to our kids and their kids to sort out at some point down the track, Mr Speaker. We don't need 2 referendums. We can get this done in one. We can move forward together. We can listen better and we can get better outcomes for our people. We can rise above the nasty and negative and angry and divisive and dishonest politics that we've seen from those opposite, and we can make history together. Because, Mr Speaker, in 30 days' time, we have a chance to grasp this generous and gracious invitation to walk together. This is our big chance as a country, and we cannot afford to waste it.
Order. Give the call to the member for Calare.
To the Prime Minister. It's 10 months to the day that horrific torrents of water hit Eugowra, Kewdale, Molong, Canowindra, Manildra and Wellington. The failure to deliver our region the same level of support that other disaster-hit areas of the state have received is a disgrace and an outrage. What is your government doing to get this vital assistance moving? And with the anniversary of the disaster fast approaching, will you again visit Eugowra and our region and invite the New South Wales Premier along too?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Calare for his question, and I pay tribute to his strong advocacy for his local community. I visited Eugowra with him, in addition with the then Premier of New South Wales, Dominic Perrottet, to see firsthand and to talk with the community there. It was devastating scenes. The power of water was on display for all to see, where some homes had been lifted up, literally, and taken a kilometre down the road. A steel construction bridge that had been moved and was nowhere near the river was a frightening concept, and I pay tribute as well to all of the emergency service workers, to the brave men and women of the Australian Defence Force who took us there on that day and who did such extraordinary work assisting the local community, but also to the resilience of that community. I certainly will continue to work closely with the New South Wales State Government to deliver the disaster recovery support that has been committed. We have delivered every single dollar of the funding from our behalf as a Commonwealth Government, but I know that at a time like this it is very difficult. Last month we announced a Community Recovery Officer in Forbes to work with community groups, disaster management and recovery stakeholders. The Community Recovery Officer is already operating in the Cabone Shire. I know the member for Riverina at that time as well. I visited flood areas as well. Recovery grants are available for primary producers of up to $75,000, for small businesses and not-for-profit organisations of $50,000, rural landholder grants of up to $10,000, medium-sized business support grants to support the re-establishment of medium businesses or not-for-profits, back home grants of up to $20,000 to help pay for restoring housing to a habitable condition or replacing essential household items, and rental support grants to contribute to the cost of 16 weeks' rent. If there's more can be done, I'm certainly always up for doing what is necessary for communities that have suffered so much. I visited Lismore with the member for Page, I visited Riverina, I visited Calare, and I certainly will take up the invitation of the member for Calare to visit the community. I'll invite the New South Wales Premier as well, because I'm sure at times like this what we need is for the whole community and different levels of government, federal, state and local, to work together.
Call to the honourable member for Lalor.
My question, Deputy Speaker, is to the Minister for Health. How will constitutional recognition through a voice help to deliver improved health outcomes for First Nations peoples in Australia?
Give a call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Lalor for her question. Mr Speaker, as badges in the House indicate, today is Are You OK Day, a campaign that was started by Gav Larkin about 14 years ago, who had lost his dad to suicide many years before that. I had the privilege of knowing Gav very well, as many in this House did, and his powerful message reminds us all of our own individual capacity to help someone in trouble, just with the simple question, reaching out to them and asking, "Are you okay?" We lost Gav, tragically young, to cancer more than a decade ago, but his campaign, as we all see today, is living long through his family, and today there will be millions of conversations around Australia reflecting his original vision. "Are you okay?" is a message for us to keep front in mind over the next 30 days through this referendum campaign. As Health Minister, already I'm receiving reports of really serious spikes in levels of distress among Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Lifeline, which operates 13 Yarn, a crisis support line for Indigenous Australians, is reporting record levels of request for help and for support, as are other services in the area. An echo of Minister Burney's injunction earlier this week for us to treat each other with respect, no matter what our view about the question that the Parliament has put before the Australian people for October 14. Mr Speaker, a good doctor listens carefully to their patients because a good doctor knows that that leads to better outcomes, and a wise Parliament should listen carefully to a group in our community who has lived with such poor outcomes and opportunities decade after decade. I can't think of an area of policy where an advisory voice of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people would be valuable more than health. Year after year, this chamber receives the annual Closing the Gap report that lays out in awful detail the yawning gap in health outcomes and life expectancy between Indigenous Australians and the rest of the country. And with the best of intentions and substantial investment, things are not changing. Indeed, in some areas, they are getting worse. The approach we've followed over years after years is simply not working. And on this day in particular, we should reflect on the fact that young First Nations Australians are twice as likely to take their own life as the rest of the country. Those data aren't shifting, and the causes are complex. The consequences are just shatteringly tragic. They extend well beyond the health discipline or the health portfolio. Listening to community representatives through a voice will help us respond to challenges like that. As the PM said this morning, the advice is good, we'll follow it. If it's not good, we won't. It's a pretty simple concept, really, but potentially just so powerful.
Just on indulgence, I'll call the member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to associate the opposition with the minister's comments about Are You OK Day only, and the importance of Are You OK Day.
Order.
The importance of Are You OK Day to every Australian. As I go across the country in this role, it is more important than ever that we stay connected as communities. And whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in schools, or whether it is in this parliament, we should be looking after each other today and on all days, and particularly young people.
Members on my right.
Young people have gone through so much, through COVID, through disasters, and they are also experiencing the cost of living pressures that their parents are coming home and expressing those stresses with mortgages, rents, energy. So today on Are You OK Day, I encourage every Australian to reach out to each other and ask, "Are you OK?" is a very important question that leads to a very important conversation.
Just order. Just for the member for Lindsay, I'll be writing to her later today about the use of indulgence. Give the call to the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Does the minister recall making the following statement in July 2019 when speaking about a federal treaty? It could be about fiscal arrangements.
I'm just going to ask the member to state that question again, because I didn't hear the end part, because there was too much noise on my right.
Sure. Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, the question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Does the minister recall making the following statement in July 2019 when speaking about a federal treaty? It could be about fiscal arrangements.
Could be about fiscal arrangements. Order. Order. The minister, the Minister for Skills is warned. The Minister for Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, I seek your ruling. Last week you indicated that if members interjected and were warned and subsequently interjected, they should be removed under Standing Order 94A. Those standing orders, respectfully, Mr Speaker, do need to be applied equally. The Minister for Home Affairs is, in this question time, a serial offender, and you have warned her—
Resume your seat. Yep. Order. Yeah. I thank the Deputy Leader for raising that matter, because she is correct. When questions are being asked and before the Minister or Prime Minister, or where the correct question is directed, is not the time to interject. I've made that crystal clear. The Minister for Home Affairs was warned. The person at fault this time was the Minister for Skills, and I warned him. I can give the Deputy Leader an assurance. If the Minister for Home Affairs interjects one more time, she will leave, and will the Minister for Skills. Okay. Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question. The Voice is about advice. And in the words of the South Australian Premier, when we cast our votes, allow us to summon the courage to be motivated by faith, hope and love, motivated by the pursuit of a better future over an unsatisfactory status quo.
The Minister will pause. The Minister's concluded her answer. Give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What do the latest NAPLAN results say about education outcomes for Indigenous Australians, and how could these outcomes be improved?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the legendary member for Lyons for his question. This year's NAPLAN results make it blisteringly clear that serious reform is needed. They show that 1 in 10 students across the country are below the minimum standard. That's not a surprise. As I told the House in February this year, we have raised the minimum standard that students are now required to meet. But what these results also show is that 1 in 3 children from poor families, 1 in 3 children from the bush are below that minimum standard. And so are 1 in 3 Indigenous children. And if you look at NAPLAN results over the last 10 years, you'll find that many of the children who fall behind never catch up. Only 1 in 5 children who are below the minimum standard in 3rd grade are above that standard by the time they're in Year 9. Only 1 in 5. And I want the House, I want Australians in the gallery, Australians watching on TV and listening to think about this. Of all those Indigenous children who are behind the minimum standard when they're in 3rd grade, it's not 1 in 5 who catch up by Year 9, it's 1 in 17. Indigenous students are 3 times more likely to fall behind and 3 times more likely to stay there, to be stuck there. Think about that. Think about the waste of potential. Now, I'm asked about how you fix it. The next National School Reform Agreement that will strike next year is about fixing funding and fixing things like this, tying funding to the sort of things that are going to help a child who falls behind to catch up, to keep up and to finish school. And one of those things is catch-up tutoring, where a child falls behind, they're taken out of the regular classroom and given extra help. With 1 teacher, a couple of kids, 50 minutes a day, 4 days a week. In the course of 18 weeks, they can learn as much as you would ordinarily learn in 12 months. They catch up. But that doesn't mean that a voice isn't needed. As I've said before, we've got to do more than just change what we do. We've got to change the way we do things.
because it's not just what happens in the classroom that counts. Everything from health to housing to employment can have an impact on how your child goes at school, or whether they go at all. The Voice can help bring all of that together. So it's not only 1 in 17 Indigenous children that catch up. So more Indigenous kids reach their potential. And they're not my words, they're the words of Jonathan Thurston, the rugby league great, who says the Voice will mean more of our kids reach their potential. And if that's not a reason to vote yes, I don't know what is.
Concluded. The call to the Prime Minister. Order. The member for Groom will resume his seat.
Surprised you're still here.
Order. Prime Minister has the call. Order.
He's still having his lunch. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper, Mr. Speaker.